It was late in the evening as they began to descend from the upper room and walk through the streets of the city. They passed by the lower pool and exited the fountain gate. The streets were lined with fires and tents of Passover pilgrims. Most of them were fast asleep after having eaten a heavy meal. Those that were still awake paid no attention to this small band of men as they walked the chalky road. Well, they exited the city streets and through the valley, and they began to ascend a path that would take them to the Garden of Gethsemane. The path was steep, and so they stopped to rest. Back within the city walls of Jerusalem was the 12th apostle, running through the dark streets. His feet had been washed by the one he was about to betray, and his heart had been seized by the evil one whom he had heard, and he was running to find Caiaphas. The final encounter of the battle had begun. Now Jesus, as he looked out over the city streets, he could see what others could not. For what he saw was the dashing of demons milling about the people, positioning themselves to influence. He saw Satan staging for that final encounter, when Satan would open up the caverns of hell to receive the source of light. It was here on the outskirts of Jerusalem that this battle would end, and Jesus knew it. Yet he continued on his way along this path, and when he reached the entrance to the garden, he stopped, and his eyes looked at his band of friends, and he realized that this would be the last time that they would be together before they abandoned him. And he knew what they would do when the soldiers came. And he knew that the final betrayal was only minutes away. He didn't lecture them. He didn't accuse them. He didn't warn them. Instead, he chose to pray. In the final moments that he would spend with his disciples, he chose to pray with them and for them. Now imagine yourself in a similar situation. Your final hour with a son who may be sent overseas. Or worse, your final moments with a dying spouse. Or your last visit with a parent. What do you say? What do you do? Well, it's interesting to note that Jesus chose to pray. And he chose to pray for you and for me. In the book of John, in the 17th chapter, Jesus prays to his Father, and he says, "Father, I will that they also, whom thou hast given me, be with me where I am, that they may behold my glory, which thou hast given me. For thou lovedst me before the foundations of the world. O righteous Father, the world hath not known thee, but I have known thee. And these have known that thou hast sent me. And I have declared unto them thy name, and will declare it, that they love with which thou hast loved me may be in them, and I in them." As Jesus stepped into that garden, you were in his prayers. As Jesus looked into heaven, you were in his vision. And as Jesus dreamed of the day when we would all be with him, he saw you there. Never, though, had he felt so alone. For what must be done, only he could do. An angel can't do it. For what angel has the power to overcome the gates of hell? A man can't do it. For what man has the purity over sin's claim? No force on earth can defeat the force of evil and win, except God. Well, Jesus as a man knew what was to come before him, and he asked his heavenly Father if there was another way. He pleaded for another way. We know that at any point in time, he could have turned away from this whole mess and just walked away. But he didn't. He didn't because he saw you. He saw you in a world that is unfair, a world where people will lie about you, a world where you are confused, a world where you are torn between desires, with a body that grows sick and a heart that grows weak. He knows what it's like to be plotted against. And he wanted you to know that you're not alone, that he's been there too. Well, the important thing is that he also knows that when you plead to God and ask him to remove you from a situation that you don't want to be in, he knows that God's answer in a firm but gentle voice is oftentimes no. And Jesus accepted that answer. In the Garden of Gethsemane that night, an angel of mercy and peace came over that man who was praying. And as Jesus stood, the anguish that had been in his eyes was removed. His fists that were clenched so tightly were now relaxed. And his heart was no longer at war. For the battle had been won. Now, many believe that the battle was won at Golgotha, when Jesus was nailed to that cross, paying the price for our sin. It wasn't. Many believe the sign of victory is the empty tomb. It isn't. The sign of victory was in that garden when Jesus stood there at peace among those olive trees. For it was there in that garden that Jesus made the decision. The decision he made was that he would rather go to hell for you, paying the price that only we should pay, than to go to heaven without you.